Welcome to Nikki's Nightmares, where chilling tales come to life. In today's terrifying episode, we descend into the violent and unpredictable world of poltergeists, the so-called noisy ghosts that do far more than whisper in the dark. These entities are said to rattle walls, hurl furniture, shatter glass, and even leave physical marks on their victims. From centuries-old accounts of phantom drumming and unseen hands overturning objects, to infamous cases like the Bell Witch, the Enfield haunting, the Beck Poltergeist of 1962, and the terrifying Black Monk of Pontefract. Tonight we explore documented outbreaks where chaos wasn't just heard, it was felt. Unlike traditional hauntings tied to a place, poltergeist activity is said to follow people, escalating from subtle knocks and flickering lights to violent attacks, levitations, and unexplained injuries. Are they restless spirits, demonic forces, psychic energy unleashed under stress, or something far darker that refuses to be understood? If you love scary stories, paranormal encounters, and true horror experiences rooted in real historical cases, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join me as we delve into the deep, dark, and the mysterious. Poltergeist. The word itself feels restless, unsettled. It comes from the German poltern, to rattle, to make noise, and Geist, ghost, the noisy ghost. But those who have lived through a poltergeist haunting will tell you, the noise is only the beginning. Unlike traditional spirits, which are said to linger in a specific place, often where they lived or died, a poltergeist does not always bind itself to a location. It binds itself to people, a family, a child, an individual who becomes the unwilling center of something volatile and unseen. Reports describe activity that begins subtly. Lights flicker, doors creak open, knocks echo through empty walls, objects shift slightly out of place, and then it escalates. Furniture overturns, glass shatters. Heavy objects are thrown across rooms with violent force. Some victims have reported scratches and bite marks appearing on their skin. Others speak of being shoved downstairs, struck by unseen hands, even lifted from the ground. Poltergeists are said to remain largely invisible, rarely manifesting in physical form. Instead, they announce themselves through destruction, through chaos. And unlike what many believe about ghosts, fleeing does not always end it. There are accounts claiming that once a poltergeist has latched on, moving homes is futile. The disturbance follows. Attempts at exorcism sometimes worsen the aggression, and in certain cases, even when the activity seems to stop, it returns. But what exactly is a poltergeist? Some believe they are demons. Others say they are the restless dead, extra-dimensional entities, folklore beings, fairies, goblins, trolls, even manifestations of dark magic summoned by witches or warlocks in old superstitions. Then there is the theory of psychokinesis, that poltergeists are not spirits at all, but destructive psychic energy unconsciously released, often by adolescents under stress. Yet that explanation struggles when confronted with cases where the entity appears intelligent, calculating, even cruel. History offers chilling examples. One of the earliest possible accounts comes from 94 AD Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, recorded an exorcism performed by a man named Eleazar. According to Josephus, as the unclean spirit was drawn from the afflicted person, a bowl of water across the room overturned by an unseen force, as if the departing presence needed to prove it had existed. Centuries later, in 1662, England would be shaken by the tale of the drummer of Tedworth. John Mompesson sued a local drummer for fraud and confiscated his drum. Soon after, Mompesson's home filled nightly with the sound of phantom drumming. Knocks pounded through walls. The noise would not stop. Many believed the drummer had used witchcraft to torment the household in revenge. Then came the Epworth Rectory haunting in 1716. Reverend Samuel Wesley, his wife, and their 19 children began hearing violent knocks and footsteps echoing through their home in Lincolnshire. The noises ran up and down the stairs, pounded on walls, disrupted sleep for weeks. They called the entity Old Geoffrey. They searched every corner of the rectory, found nothing, and then, in January of 1717, it simply stopped. No explanation, no closure. But perhaps no case in American folklore is more infamous than the Bell Witch. Beginning around 1817 in Adams, Tennessee, John Bell Sr. and his family reported violent disturbances attributed to a spirit many believed was the witch Kate Batts. There were knocking sounds in the walls, slaps and pinches inflicted on family members, objects thrown without visible cause. Animals behaved strangely. Scratches appeared on doors. One legend even claims John Bell was poisoned, and that the entity lingered for decades. The true identity of the force remains debated. Some suspected personal grudges, others darker spiritual causes. But the Bell Witch story embedded itself deeply into American paranormal lore, powerful enough to inspire films centuries later. Fast forward to 1977, Enfield, England. Single mother Peggy Hodgson called police after furniture began moving inside her home. One officer witnessed a chair slide across the floor, though whether it moved on its own remained contested. Soon, knocking sounds echoed through the walls. Toys and rocks were thrown. Reports claimed demonic voices spoke through one of the children. Investigators alleged that children levitated. Paranormal investigators, including Ed Warren, visited the home and supported claims of demonic influence. Skeptics argued hoaxes. Believers pointed to evidence they felt could not be faked. The debate continues, and then, more recently, 2011, Coventry, England. Lisa Manning and her family had just moved into a new home when activity began. Temperatures dropped, drawers slid open, chairs moved across floors, dishes shattered without warning, scratches appeared on Lisa and her children. Priests and mediums attempted intervention. Nothing worked. Finally, television paranormal investigator Derek Acora visited the home. After his involvement, the disturbances reportedly ceased. Coincidence? Resolution? Performance? What unsettled many observers was that the previous family had fled the property abruptly, leaving behind belongings and newly installed carpets. They left, as if escaping something. Throughout centuries, poltergeist reports share unsettling patterns, often centered around children or adolescents, often explosive and short-lived, often impossible to prove, yet deeply traumatic to those involved. Are they spirits seeking attention, demons feeding on fear, psychic energy spiraling out of control, or something we have yet to understand? Whatever they are not passive. They do not simply linger in corners. They rattle, they strike, they escalate. And when the noise begins in the dead of night, when something unseen knocks from inside your walls, when a chair moves, just slightly, on its own, you may not be dealing with a ghost. You may be dealing with something far louder and far more dangerous. The Thornton Heath Poltergeists. Tonight we travel back to Thornton Heath, England. The year is 1938, and in a modest home on February 13th, something begins. The story was first brought to public attention by journalist and psychical researcher Nandor Fodor. He investigated the strange disturbances surrounding a 34-year-old woman named Alma Fielding. Alma had not lived an easy life. Since childhood, she suffered from chronic kidney problems. The pain would come in waves, sharp, burning, relentless. She carried prescriptions for antibacterial medicine and sedatives just to function through the worst of it. On that February evening, she was visiting a friend when the familiar pelvic pain struck without warning. She knew what it meant. Another long night. She returned home, swallowed her medication, and went straight to bed. Outside, winter pressed hard against the house. Frost coated the windows. The wind moved like something alive in the dark. Her illness left her bedridden for days, and she was not alone in her suffering. Her husband, Leslie, soon joined her in bed, his gums bleeding after having all of his teeth pulled in preparation for dentures. Both of them lay there, weak and exhausted, waiting for their bodies to cooperate again. 3 days passed. Then, on Friday, something changed. Alma noticed it first. Pressed into the frost on the bedroom window was a handprint, but not an ordinary one. It had 6 fingers. That night, near midnight, the couple drifted toward sleep, and then the sound of shattering glass tore through the room. They turned on the lamp. The tumbler that had been resting calmly on the nightstand was now in fragments across the floor. Before they could even process it, another glass object flew across the bedroom and smashed violently against the wall. Leslie whispered for Alma to turn out the light. Darkness swallowed the room, and suddenly their blanket was ripped upward, thrown over their faces as if by invisible hands. They struggled beneath it, trying to reach the lamp switch, but the light would not come on. They called for their son, Donald. He rushed into the room and immediately ducked as a glass makeup jar shot past his head. The family lodger, Georgie, ran in after him. Coins struck him in the chest. Donald tried again to switch on the lamp. Nothing. Thinking quickly, he lit a match. The bulb was gone. It wasn't broken. It wasn't shattered. It had vanished from its socket. They found it across the room, in one piece, still warm. By morning, Alma felt strangely improved. She went to the kitchen to make breakfast, but whatever had visited them during the night had not left. An egg lifted into the air and shattered at her feet. Later, as she cleaned her breakfast dishes, her saucer snapped cleanly in half. Alma made a decision that would cement this story in history. She did not call the police. She called the press. The Sunday Pictorial was running a series on paranormal phenomena at the time. Alma reportedly told them, "Come to my house. There are things going on here I cannot explain." When the reporters arrived, they did not leave disappointed. Almost immediately they witnessed an egg float down the hallway and land outside in the yard near their feet. In the kitchen, a pink dog toy began to tremble. A can opener flew through the air at head height. They moved to the sitting room for tea. As Alma lifted her cup, the teacup and saucer rose completely out of her hands. They hung there. Then the saucer spun in midair and fractured. A shard embedded itself into Alma's thumb, drawing blood. As one reporter tended to her wound, more glass shattered in the kitchen. Another egg smashed against the sitting room door. And then, coal from the fireplace flew directly at one of the journalists. The next report labeled them the occupants of the House of Fear. Psychical researcher Nandor Fodor would later investigate personally, attempting to determine whether fraud, hysteria, or genuine paranormal force was responsible. To this day, debate continues, but the disturbances were witnessed, documented, and widely publicized. Years later, Thornton Heath would face another haunting, different house, different family, same violent energy. It began with something simple, a clock radio blaring without warning. Then came the banging, on walls, on ceilings, heavy stomping sounds overhead, and with the noise came sightings. A spectre described by family members as resembling a vampire-like figure. It radiated malice. This was no playful disturbance. This felt intentional, hostile. Over the following months, activity escalated. Pictures crashed from walls. Glasses and plates hurled themselves from cupboards. A lamp leapt from a table and shattered over the father's head. A few days before Christmas, the family watched in terror as their decorated tree began to shake violently. Ornaments ripped free and smashed against the walls. The family invited friends over, hoping a full house might weaken whatever held dominion there. Instead, the banging began again, louder. The front door burst open. The lights went out. The gathering ended immediately. The next day, they contacted a local church and a priest blessed the property. But the disturbances intensified. Crashes thundered from upstairs rooms. The figure began appearing more frequently. After the failed blessing, they turned to a spiritualist medium. Upon entering the home, she claimed to sense two spirits. A farmer and his wife, the Chattertons. According to the medium, the couple believed the living family were trespassers on their land, and they would use any means necessary to drive them out. The medium attempted to persuade the spirits to leave. They refused. "This is our house," they allegedly insisted, even in death. For 4 years, the family endured what they described as relentless torment. And eventually, they gave up. They packed their belongings and left. Poltergeist cases often blur the line between psychology and the supernatural. Some researchers argue that intense emotional or physical stress, such as Alma's illness, can trigger phenomena known as recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. Others insist these were manifestations of spirits with unfinished business. Thornton Heath remains one of England's most unsettling documented poltergeist outbreaks. 2 households, separated by time, connected by violence in the dark. The frost may melt, the glass may be swept away, but some houses, remember, and sometimes they fight back. The Beck Poltergeist, March of 1962. Indianapolis, a quiet street on North Delaware, and a house that would become one of the most documented and most unsettling poltergeist outbreaks in American history. The Beck Poltergeists. It began on Sunday night, March 11th, just after 10 p.m. Inside the large 2-story home at 2910 North Delaware Street lived Renate Beck, a 32-year-old divorced mother originally from Vienna. With her lived her 13-year-old daughter, Linda, and her widowed mother, Lena Gemmiker. According to Renate, nothing unusual had happened that day. A heavy glass beer mug sat in the sink. Renate and her mother were both in the room, but nowhere near it. Without warning, the mug lifted, not tipped, not slid, lifted, and dropped behind a flower pot. Seconds passed and no one spoke. At 10:37 p.m., the silence broke. A violent crash echoed from upstairs. Given the recent burglaries in the neighborhood, Renate feared the worst. The 3 women went to investigate. There was no intruder, but a large piece of German crystal that had been resting securely on a bookcase now lay shattered on the floor, nearly 4 feet away from where it had originally stood. "I don't see how it could have gotten off the bookcase," Renate would later say, "nor how it landed that far away." Still shaken, they tried to calm themselves, until shortly after 11 p.m., when a heavy glass ashtray was hurled across a downstairs room. Half an hour later, another piece of crystal exploded into fragments. That was enough. They fled the house and checked into a hotel. They thought they were escaping something, but the outbreak had only just begun. The following afternoon, around 1:30 p.m., they returned home. For 30 minutes, everything was still. Then the sound of shattering glass began again. Bowls, vases, dishes, broken, scattered. When Mrs. Gemmiker stood from a kitchen chair, a coffee cup from across the room suddenly flew and smashed against the wall, precisely where her head had been moments earlier. Terrified, they called the police. Sergeant John Mullin arrived first. He found 3 shaken women and a house littered with broken glass. He suggested vibrations from a hi-fi stereo, or perhaps a pellet gun. But the record player in the home was unplugged, and the storm windows were intact. Even as officers stood inside the house, activity continued. Patrolman Ray Patton heard something crash in Linda's bedroom. He entered to find a glass swan figurine shattered on the floor. No one had been inside. More officers arrived. High-frequency sound equipment was brought in. Hundreds of neighbors gathered outside. During the testing, nothing happened. But once the equipment was removed, it started again. That same evening, Officer Patton witnessed something he would not forget. In Renate's bedroom sat 3 matching glasses, hidden under a hat for safekeeping. 3 others had already shattered mysteriously over the weekend. Patton left the room. Seconds later, one of those hidden glasses flew from beneath the hat, struck him in the back, and shattered. The force left him bruised for days. He rushed back inside. Another glass lay broken. Only one remained intact. The room had been empty. He had been the only person nearby. Even skeptics struggled with that detail. Then came something stranger. Puncture wounds began appearing on the hands and arms of Renate and her mother. Tiny marks, like bat bites. Police records described them as small, paired punctures. The skin around them bruised dark. Yet the women reported no pain. On one occasion, Lena suddenly clutched her throat and cried out that she was being choked. When hands were pulled away, witnesses saw triangular puncture marks on either side of her neck. A policeman examined her hands. No rings, nothing sharp, no explanation. Altogether, Lena was marked 9 times, Renate twice. Dr. William Roll, one of the nation's leading researchers in psychical phenomena, later witnessed several of these wounds appearing. He would document 110 separate incidents in the house between March 16th and March 22nd. He ruled out fraud. He ruled out trickery. He could not rule out something else. Objects continued to move. Feathers were torn from pillows. Furniture shifted. A wall lamp was pulled from the wall, twice, even after being secured with a larger nail. One night, 3 steak knives were found on the kitchen floor, arranged in the shape of a cross. They were placed back into the drawer. Moments later, the same sound, the same arrangement. A cross. Again. Emile Noceda, a respected businessman and close friend of the family, was present nearly every day during the 16-day outbreak. He insisted the activity escalated in stages. First glassware, then china and cutlery, then furniture. It was selective and deliberate. And then money vanished. Renate's purse disappeared. Inside it, $125, funds for a small restaurant she had recently opened. The purse would not reappear until March 25th. Found nudging against Lena's leg. Only $35 remained. 2 days later, police were called again. This time, Lena was found semi-conscious on the floor. An officer claimed he saw her throw a heavy tray. She was arrested for disorderly conduct. Newspapers quickly declared the case solved. blame the elderly mother. Case closed. Lieutenant Francis Dux even conducted a 90-minute observation session, attempting to get the spirits to come out. Nothing happened during that time, so he dismissed the paranormal entirely. But Dr. Roll and psychologist Dr. David Blumenthal had divided their time observing each member of the household carefully. On one night, Blumenthal physically held Lena's hands while knocking sounds erupted from her bedroom. Dr. Roll stood in the kitchen. Linda was in bed. Renate was elsewhere. No one could have caused it. Yet it happened. The phenomena peaked and then subsided by March 22nd. Just as suddenly as it began, the house was left in ruin. Broken mirrors, dented walls, shattered glass everywhere, and no explanation, despite police presence, despite public scrutiny, despite scientific observation. The Beck Poltergeist case remains unsolved, documented, witnessed and debated, but never explained. Indianapolis still carries the mark of those 16 days, when something unseen moved through a quiet home on North Delaware Street, lifted glass from sinks, arranged knives into crosses, and left behind bruises shaped like teeth. Some cases fade into legend, others become cautionary tales, and some, like this one, simply refuse to give answers. The Black Monk of Pontefract. Tonight, we step inside one of the most violently haunted homes in Britain. A quiet terraced house in Pontefract, England. An ordinary address, 30 East Drive. But what unfolded there in August of 1966 would earn it a name whispered with unease for decades to come. It began on a hot summer evening. Sarah Scholes was watching her 15-year-old grandson, Philip Pritchard, while the rest of the family was away on holiday. The house had recently been renovated. Fresh, clean, normal. And yet, despite the heat outside, the air inside felt strangely cold. Philip walked into the living room and stopped. At chest height, suspended in mid-air, a fine white dust began falling silently around the room. Not from the ceiling, not from a crack in the plaster. It simply appeared, drifting down from nowhere. Sarah stared. Philip stared. There was no explanation, no source. Confused and shaken, Sarah called Philip's aunt, Marie, who lived across the street. Marie arrived, took one look at the white powder coating the room, and decided it needed cleaning. She stepped into the kitchen to grab a rag and slipped. A puddle of water had formed on the floor. It hadn't been there moments earlier. She mopped it up. Another puddle appeared, then another. The water company was called, pipes were checked, no leaks, no burst lines, no reason for water to be pooling on the kitchen floor. Marie eventually returned home. The house quieted. But at around 7 o'clock that evening, Philip screamed from the kitchen. "Grandma, it's happening again." Loose-leaf tea and sugar were scattered across the counter as though flung by unseen hands. The button on the tea dispenser clicked down violently. Boiling water poured out, splashing across the mess. It stopped, then depressed again, and again, and again. The mechanism continued to slam downward even after the water reservoir had emptied, hissing and snapping as if something unseen was hammering it with furious insistence. "Stop!" Sarah cried into the empty room. "Stop it!" Then came a crash from the hallway. They rushed out. Nothing. Darkness, silence. And then, without warning, the light switch clicked on by itself. That was only the beginning. After that first terrifying night, which ended with furniture rocking violently and Sarah and Philip fleeing to a neighbor's house to sleep, the activity stopped. For 2 years. Perhaps Sarah tried to convince herself it had been imagination, stress, a trick of the mind. But when the phenomena returned, it did so with force. Loud crashes became part of daily life. Objects were hurled across rooms, including a heavy oak sideboard. A grandfather clock was thrown. Items vanished and reappeared in impossible places. Green foam reportedly burst from the sink. An aunt had an entire carton of milk poured over her head by invisible hands. And the attacks focused on the youngest member of the household, Diane Pritchard. She was thrown from her bed. She woke on the floor with her mattress flipped on top of her. Family photographs were found slashed. The disturbances became so common, the family gave the entity a name: Fred. But Fred was no harmless trickster. Exorcisms were attempted. The walls reportedly wept holy water. People were slapped, pushed down the stairs, shoved violently. Upside-down crosses appeared. At one point, a pair of women's fur gloves were seen clapping and conducting hymns meant to drive the entity out, as if mocking the ritual. Then, one night, Mr. and Mrs. Pritchard awoke to find a tall, dark figure hovering over their bed. It wore black robes. Its face was never seen. It vanished quickly, but others would later see it too. On the stairs, in the shadows, watching. The physical attacks escalated. Visitors were scratched and bruised. Diane's hair once stood straight up, as if charged with static, and then she was dragged, screaming, up an entire flight of stairs. She was found with finger-shaped bruises around her throat, and then silence. The activity stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Years later, Cluniac monk researcher Tom Cluniff connected the events to a grim piece of local history. In the 16th century, a monk had been convicted of the rape and murder of a young girl, a girl reportedly around Diane's age. He was hanged near the very location where 30 East Drive now stands. The sightings of a tall, black-robed figure suddenly took on chilling context. Fred was no mere nickname anymore. He became known as the Black Monk of Pontefract. Interest in the haunting surged. In 2012, director Pat Holden released When the Lights Went Out, inspired by the events at 30 East Drive. The film reignited public fascination. Producer Bill Bungay eventually purchased the house. Skeptical, unconvinced by ghost stories, he dismissed reports of odd lights, strange noises, and malfunctioning electronics, until one night. Alone outside the property after locking the gate, Bungay secured it firmly with a cinder block. He turned to lock the front door. His key had vanished from his pocket. He glanced back. The gate stood wide open. The hairs on his neck rose. Since then, Bungay has treated the house, and whatever resides there, with more caution. Objects have reportedly been thrown near him, missing by inches. The house is now rented to investigators and the curious. Hundreds of experiences have been recorded, including one unsettling account in which a young girl visiting neighbors wandered into the room chewing on a polystyrene orange. When asked where she got it, she replied simply, "A man in black gave it to me." The Black Monk of Pontefract has been called the most violent poltergeist in Britain, but what happened at 30 East Drive does not fit the typical definition of a poltergeist, the idea of harmless psychokinetic energy tied to a distressed adolescent. This presence attacked children. It manifested as a figure. It inflicted harm, and it has persisted in legend and in reported activity for more than half a century. The house still stands, the stairs still creak, and if you linger long enough, you may feel something watching from the shadows. The question is not whether the Black Monk ever existed. The question is whether he ever truly left. The story ends here, but the terror does not. Join me again, like, comment, and subscribe if you dare.